to Through the Eyes of a Therapist with your host and creator of the podcast, Cristal Martinez Acosta. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I live, work, and play in El Paso, Texas. Today you will be hearing part 2 of 4 of a series that I like to call #Fight the Stigma, #Mental Health Awareness Month. Today I'll be discussing with a couple of my colleagues mental health stigma in different populations amongst men, Latinos, and within the therapy community. Remember that stigma is a sense of shame and judgment about a diagnosis or a struggle. For more information on #Fighting the Stigma, #Mental Health Awareness Month, visit my various pages on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Each of my podcast episodes this month are for fighting the stigma or to bring awareness to mental health. My 2 guests today are here. One is over the phone and one is in person. And so first I'd like to introduce you to Monica Garfias, and she's a licensed professional counselor. We used to work together and then she moved away, sadly, but she is here. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Monica Garfias. Like you said, I'm a licensed professional counselor, currently practicing in Virginia. So I got my bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of California, Los Angeles, and my master's degree in counseling from Argosy University, Phoenix.
Awesome. That's great. And you have been counseling for how long?
I've been in the role as a counselor since 2010, so for about 8 years now.
Now we have Elisa. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I have a master's in social work, and I've been on the podcast before. We were in the introverts. We did the introvert podcast together. And, I'm here to see how I can contribute to your podcast on, mental health and the stigma that goes with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And what kind of population do you work with?
I work predominantly with victims of crime, so there's no specific age group. It can be any age, but most of my clients are children or under 18.
Okay, very good. So I guess the first thing that we should probably do is identify stigma and what that means. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
With the populations that we work with, we are in the border region, right? At least Cristal and I are right now. I do get a lot of parents who initially come in and say, well, we are used to just keeping things inside the family. We don't normally tell people our problems or things like that. And this is really the first time that they have talked to anyone outside of law enforcement, since they are all victims of crime. So, it's difficult when they come in because they've had to tell their story to multiple law enforcement officials, and that is, that can sometimes re-traumatize the victim. So that's difficult. But, because of the specifics of who I work with, mostly they are there hoping for help. And so maybe there's a slightly less stigma with victims of crime because they know that something happened to them and that they need help for that. So in that sense, maybe there's just a little bit less. But yeah, they definitely come in not knowing what counseling is, or they ask how long it's going to take, or they're not sure what it's going to be like.
Yeah, that's true. I think kind of like Monica off the air earlier was talking about how stigma is, I guess, huge with mental health, especially with Latino families or even people of color in general. And I think part of that is understanding that maybe they need help, but they won't seek a therapist or a psychiatrist until it's the very last resort. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like crime is a huge or extreme circumstance in which somebody could seek mental health services, but it's almost because they've been forced to. Like, right. This crime has happened, yes. So now I have to.
Right. So for me, most of my clients, their catalyst is the crime that happened, and that brings them into the office. So they have maybe they feel a little bit safer in the sense of, well, we've come for a very specific reason, and then that helps them feel a little bit more comfortable with that.
That's true. Like something is causing the symptomology, so it makes it safer for them to initiate, right? And say, okay, I admit that there's a problem, but only because I can blame it on a crime or
something happened.
Something happened. So now I'm going to seek services. So it sounds like, stigma, I think, is highly attached to the idea of shame, and feeling ashamed of having to deal with a diagnosis, a mental illness, a mental disorder. And I think it's like a form of judgment, like a self-judgment, but then also judgment from the community or the culture that the person is in, right? What do you think of that, Monica?
Well, yeah, I think that's exactly it. Right now I'm working with predominantly adult women. My caseload is 99% Spanish-speaking Latina women from different Latin American countries. And by the time they get to me, it's the last resort. They've tried everything and nothing has worked. And the way counseling or therapy is portrayed to most Latino families is through music, through telenovelas, through news, through movies. So it's all media focused. And if we look at those sources, it's very extreme. Like all the telenovelas, the bad guy ends up like locked up in a mental hospital with a straitjacket. The songs, when it talks about somebody volviéndose loco or going crazy, it's psychosis. That's what they portray. And so those are the messages most Latinos are getting, whether explicitly or implicitly, and that really kind of impacts their choice and willing to take initiative to seek help when something really is going wrong.
Yeah, because the images, like you said, in all media forms, in songs and on the TV, on telenovelas and in the movies, either you're healthy or you're completely crazy, quote unquote crazy, and they define crazy by being psychotic or being, I guess, kind of very dysregulated and out of control and aggressive and stuff like that. So I think people won't seek help because they feel like if I seek help or I go to a therapist, that's what I'll be seen as. I'll be seen as completely crazy, completely out of control. It's interesting that you work with mainly Latino women, Spanish-speaking women. Do you have any specific stories about how stigma has impacted any of them?
Yeah, there's, countless amounts of them. Some of them have told me that their husbands will refer to the counselor as a loquero. Like, oh, you're going to go visit your loquero, your head shrinker. And it's a form of, like, putting them down, and they feel really bad about it. And most of these women are victims of crime, too. Not officially, like some of them are here seeking asylum because of the crimes they have suffered in their home countries or even here. And even that doesn't like really convince them to say like, yes, I need help. And so when they start talking to me and finally build that comfort with me and process of therapy, they're like, oh, wow, this isn't what I thought it would be. I thought you were going to judge me, or I thought you were going to tell me to go take medicine. And so it really throws it for a loop because sometimes they're expecting kind of like harsh judgment. They're expecting you to tell them what to do. Just kind of like these really strong negative, they're expecting these negative reactions. So they almost come in already with a guard up. And finally, when we're able just to kind of like help them understand like this is this is your process. It's non-judgmental completely. And when they finally trust that you're telling them the truth, that's when everything, just the anxiety, the stress level of even just coming to me, like, just kind of slowly disappears. It's interesting how that process works, but it's a process. It's long. It takes a lot of psychoeducation.
Yeah, I think some of the times that I have interacted with people who don't like the idea of coming to therapy and how we have to talk about stigma. It does take a lot of psychoeducation because we have to kind of undo all of these myths and all of these images that people have captured over the years or over time about what therapy is supposed to be like. And so we have to bust all these myths and stuff. It sounds also like building trust with clients is really important, because if we don't have trust with clients, well, first, we probably won't get any work done. But then the idea of stigma and taking away kind of like harsher or unwanted parts of therapy will be more difficult, I think, or it'll be harder to engage a client probably. And then so that stigma definitely might stay there.
Yeah, sometimes helping them change those cognitive distortions of like what they think or what they have been led to believe therapy would be, it really transforms it. And so now, at least here in the small town of Virginia where I'm at, there's a lot of referrals where somebody came to see somebody at our clinic, and then they're like, oh, you know what, go talk to so-and-so, or you should call them up. Like, I think that might be a good idea. And I think kind of like, and it, one by one, that's kind of how we've been tackling it, where somebody has like this great kind of like transformation and feels very secure with their process of what they went through, and they feel held and appreciated. And so finally, and having a friend or a family member, usually that's like the first line of kind of in the hierarchy of seeking help. Like you talk to your comadre, your friends, family, somebody who's really close to you. And if they give you a recommendation of like, hey, I actually, I met this person, or I went to talk to them, or somehow I interacted with this therapist and she seemed to help, or giving firsthand stories like she helped me, really makes them more open to the idea. And so they're more likely to walk through our doors and ask for help.
Yeah, it's like word of mouth. Somebody, especially with the Latino community, somebody goes to, how you said, their comadre or like their sister or their aunt or uncle or something, and they say something about a good psychiatrist or a good doctor, then they're probably more likely to visit them. And I think stigma also has a lot to do with fear, not just shame, but fear of what could happen, or fear of that uncertainty, like what's the worst that could happen, like diagnose them with something and then that's it, like what being portrayed or being seen as somebody who is psychotic, which we know is a very extreme level and rare level of mental illness. Do either of you have any like stories from clients or stories from your family that have to do with stigma?
So when I was young, I had a lot of anxiety, and especially at night. So I was just an anxious child all around. And we would hear all these stories about La Llorona, El Cucuy, La Mano Peluda. So these are all mythical stories about this lady who killed her kids, and then at night, if you stayed up too late, you would hear her crying, which was terrifying to me. And then there's a story about La Mano Peluda, the hairy hands, that if you've been bad, or if you're up too late at night, it'll come and grab your feet. So it would terrify me. So at night, as a little kid, as a 5-6-year-old, these things would get stuck in my head. And with anxiety, we tend to ruminate a little bit more, and we catastrophize. So that's what I was doing in my head, and it was causing horrible insomnia. And my parents were frustrated with me about me not sleeping and just like staying up all night and bothering them because I was scared. And they were like, oh, it's mal de ojo. Like, she got the evil eye. That's it. Like, oh my God, this is what's up with her. Like, this is exactly what's wrong with her. And so they did the whole egg thing. So to cure the evil eye, you have to get a regular egg from the grocery store. And they do like these crosses all over your body before you go to bed. And then they crack the egg open in a glass of water, and they leave it under your bed overnight. And that's supposed to soak up whatever negative energy you got that made you this way. So they did this, and of course it didn't work because I was just an anxious kid, and that was something I think I figured out my own way how to work through that. But now looking back at it, I'm like, oh my goodness, like, really? And it was just, now looking back and being more educated and knowledgeable about the field of mental health and how it impacts children and those of us who are more anxious than others and how we tend to, take things. It was totally that, but according to my family, it was the evil eye.
Instead of thinking like, oh, it's anxiety and she probably has an anxiety disorder or a phobia or something like that. So versus labeling you right away, they were like, no, she has mal de ojo, and we're going to fix it with this egg, and we're going to fix, like, they kind of...
Yes.
I wonder what if it crossed their minds, like, oh, maybe she does have anxiety, but we just don't want to admit it. Like, I wonder if it ever did cross their minds.
I wonder, because my family uses the term nervioso a lot for everything. Like, oh, estoy nervioso. Like, kind of like to identify a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of depression.
Yeah, it's like an overall term. They use it as an umbrella
term for everything.
Yeah.
So they use nervios for everything. Ay, es que es bien nerviosa. Ay, que se me quite. And they use, like, the remedies, like, oh, you need to drink some tea to calm down and relax, and that's gonna solve it all. You need to pray more. You need to go to church, like things like that. That's how my family has tended to react to anybody with any symptom of a mental health issue.
Yeah, I remember when I was little and I was diagnosed with anxiety. I had separation anxiety, and one of the first places my mom took me to was our kind of like community church. It was like a church group. It wasn't an actual church, but she took me there. And then I remember much later going to a therapist, and then going much later to a psychiatrist. So it was one of our first options as far as it came to mental health care, like they just thought that they could pray it out of me or something like that, right? Like, not necessarily label it, because I didn't know it was anxiety back then. Like, nobody called it that. I kind of remember thinking that maybe I was like possessed or something, or like, just because that's the kind of religiosity that I grew up with. And so I was like, oh my God, help me. But then later on, somebody finally labeled it and called it something, which was the appropriate term, like separation anxiety. And I'll like never forget that day. Like, it was crazy. So I was like, wow, this is what's been going on with me this whole time. I think it was like my 7th grade school counselor in middle school. And I remember she heard the symptoms and she's like, that sounds like separation anxiety. And I was like, oh my God, that's a thing? So it was pretty cool to finally hear what the answer was. And then after that, she was kind of like the person who opened the gates for us to discover all the treatment options, because before that I hadn't gone to therapy. I hadn't gone to see a psychiatrist. I think I saw a psychologist like once or twice, but we never went back. But that was when I was really small. But anyway, stigma is pretty prevalent, I would say, among my family, and I don't know anymore. I think people are going through stuff, but they hide it, or they don't want to talk about it, or they don't want to admit it. But I can kind of like see and identify, like, I think that person might have a little bit of this or that. Not that you're supposed to diagnose your family. You're not supposed to do that, right? But, you can just tell.
I did recently have a child at like under 10 that was adamant that they didn't even want to take the school note to school, that they had been there. They had a lot of anxiety about anyone at the school, any of their classmates finding out that they had been there. They would like take the school note and hide it, not turn it in. And but that's been very, very rare. But I think that kids too feel like if my friends find out, they're gonna say that I'm crazy or something like that. Right? Because they don't have a concept of initially when they first come in what therapy is, or they just, I don't know, if things they've seen in movies or TV, I'm not sure what they think, but that a couple of people have had very kind of extreme views of what other people will think if they find out. But what I get the most is just I don't understand how talking is going to help. Like, how does this help? Right? Just the idea that talking isn't going to help me with anything, because I still have all these problems and I still have these symptoms that I deal with. So like a common response is, well, I don't know why, how's talking going to help me? Because it makes me anxious to talk about it.
Or like, I thought I wasn't supposed to talk about it anymore. Like, why are we still talking about this?
Right.
So it sounds like what you're labeling a stigma about mental health treatment. So It sounds like there's 2 different things going on. So there's stigma about a mental disorder or mental illness, right? And having that label. And then there's also the treatment stigma.
Yeah.
So people coming to you saying, like, I don't know how this is supposed to help me.
Right.
How is talking supposed to help me? Or in play therapy, one time I had a parent say, all you guys do is play. I don't get it. And I'm like, oh my God. So it's, I think that's, definitely part of the stigma. And when you were talking about the schools, it makes me think about how there's even like a systemic or like a community stigma about mental health. So I've talked to teachers, to get collateral information about a client or something like that, or principals, and you interact with them and then they say things like, I don't know what they're depressed for. I don't know what they're depressed about. Or they will badger them about not being taken out of school for doctor's appointments because technically we're not doctors.
Right.
Or counseling doesn't count as like a medical necessity. So we're going to not count their absence as like an excused absence or whatever. So it's like, are you serious? So not only are they getting these messages from adults and people in their circle of friends, but also like at school and things like that. Ugh. I'm like, it's so frustrating.
Or also this idea, and I think when you're treating kids, you maybe probably get this more, but this idea that the parent, quote, drops them off for you to fix them, end quote, like, the children are a car, right? But they are not. And so it's really about bringing an understanding that without changing the family dynamics and what happens at home, right, it's going to be very difficult for the child to change if the parents don't change.
Yeah, absolutely. If the children are going back into an environment that's chaotic and not conducive to mental health treatments, then not a lot of progress could be made, or just one part of the system's going to change and that part is going to struggle a lot, meaning the child's going to struggle through that. Yeah, that's always fun when parents come and I'm like, they're like, oh, go ahead. Like, go ahead, Johnny, go into Cristal's office. I'm like, nope, you two, get in here. Like, I'm not here to wave a magic wand over your child. Like, you get in here too. We're going to treat the whole family or whatever.
When I used to work with kids, it was like that. It was like, here, take my kid, fix them, make them stop doing what I don't like that they're doing, and then let's be happy and pretend this never happened. That was kind of the messages I would get as a therapist when I was working with children and adolescents. Now that I'm working with adults, it's funny because we're going backwards. Like, okay, let's go all the way back to when this started. And it's usually childhood or adolescence, very commonly. So it's like working with these kids in adult form. And so I'm working with that avoidance and that kind of like them battling their own stigmas of like, ooh, so that really was like kind of validating, like, ooh, so that was really bad what happened to me, right? And some of them need that validation of like, yes, like you should not have been put through all of that stuff. There's a lot of domestic violence. And so, in the Latino community, it's very common to see that a lot of women kind of take it for a long time. And those women that choose to leave are faced with kind of this idea of like, but so-and-so stayed with her husband and she had it worse than I did. Does this mean I'm weak? And so it's really kind of helping them like retrain of like, what is this relationship doing to your children, to your family, to you? Like kind of helping them rethink and kind of start all over. And it's really hard because usually the women I've been working with have chosen to leave. And so even their own family members are like, no, this is your fault. You're choosing to leave. There's something wrong with you, not with your husband who did all these horrific things to you. But it's you. You made that action, and now go see your head shrinker. Go see your loquera because you need help.
Yeah. I think especially with women in domestic violence relationships that are Latina, we come from like a collectivistic culture, and we come from having a lot of influence from our family and family members, and I think we regard the opinions of others pretty highly. And so I feel like sometimes working with adults and adult women is especially more difficult because not only do they need like the approval of the family kind of thing, but then they also have to deal with the stigma, because it's almost like they're admitting to being crazy, right? Like, I did finally go to a therapist, or I am seeking help. So because I'm the one who asked for help, I'm the one who is nuts, or I'm the one who is crazy. But yeah, it's pretty sad.
And the fact that, I mean, I don't know about you all, but it sounds like most of us have as clients either women or children. So let's not even go beyond like how few men ever even walk into our offices, and how they either will not seek treatment, or they refuse to acknowledge that there is a problem, or if there is a problem, it must be somebody else, or that they shouldn't need to express any feelings or anything like that. Which all feeds into toxic masculinity, because to this day, I have not had a male adult client. I've had, teenagers and kids, but it would be such an important part of the, such a big piece of the puzzle if men also sought help more frequently.
Yeah, that's totally true. That's a really good point. I remember only having one adult male client ever, and he came to like 3 sessions and like never came back. And most of the time with the kids that we work with, it's like a female caregiver that brings them, not necessarily a male, or dad is at home, or the male caregiver is at home or at work, or maybe that's just an excuse. It could be, I don't know. But I think a lot of the time it's left to the women to have to bring the kid, and it takes me forever to try to get dad to come into the room, because his input is important, but a lot of time he's not there. So it's like I've got to pull teeth and rearrange everything in my schedule to try to get like a male caregiver in the room with the family so I can get their input. That's so true.
Yeah, it's true. In the 8 years that I've been practicing as a therapist, I've only had 2 instances where I've had an active male client, and one of them, it was in a couples situation. We agreed to do some couples counseling for the sake of their children, and he came to like 2 or 3 sessions, and I worked with this family for like 2.5 years. So out of 2.5 years, I saw Dad like 2 to 3 times, and it was difficult for him to open up. It was really hard for him to even talk and connect with feelings and stuff. And there was one breakthrough where like he actually did kind of break down and cry, and kind of, was given the support, but he felt so ashamed of himself for doing that. And I was so proud of him. I was like, yes, emotion is great. And he was like, no, this is the worst thing I could have done. And after that, he like shut down, and he's like, oh no, I'm busy. Oh, I'm working really late. And he did. He had a really difficult job, and he had all these kind of crazy hours, so it was difficult to get him in anyways. But it was so hard for him to like, come in and kind of like be there and feel the feels and kind of connect with all of that, because he was still not used to it. He was used to just like, I work all day. I get home, I'm so tired, I don't have time to feel things. And it was, it was taking a toll on his marriage and on his kids and all that stuff. And then the other male client that I had who did complete treatment, he was court-ordered. Oh. He was court-ordered to complete treatment. And he did actually really well. And in the beginning, he was upset. Like all court-ordered clients, they don't want to be there. They're there because the judge is telling them to, not because they want to. And initially, he was just kind of like, look, let's just talk about this situation. And he would try to structure our therapy sessions by bringing all the court paperwork. And I would give him his time. But by the time we were done, I knew there was only so many sessions we could talk about court paperwork. And me not being a lawyer, I was like, okay, well, I can read it, but I can't go further than that, than just reading what the court paperwork says. But he was ordered to parenting, and so we ended up getting into like his, how his parenting styles were and what he wanted for his son, and it ended up being a very positive outcome for him. And he was like, wow, as much as I didn't want to come here, he's like, I actually learned a lot about how to communicate with my ex so that we're not engaging in like these negative patterns of communication, and it's not affecting my son. And he's like, my son's a lot happier now. And so that was really successful. And I was like, yes. But this man was court ordered. Like, he needed to come to at least, I think, 12 sessions before the court, like, he fulfilled his, court duties. He at least saw some benefit to it. But that's it. Like, in my whole time in practicing as a therapist, those are the only two men that I've really had in therapy. I've met dads, but none of them want to come into my office. Or I've had women who are like, I really want my husband to come because I think it would be helpful, but getting the husband to come in is impossible.
Yeah, it's pretty close to impossible. I wonder, though, about why it's so strong. And I think you kind of touched on toxic masculinity, right? Mm-hmm. So men, this is my theory, I'm not quite sure, but from what I remember in like sociology and watching documentaries about masculinity, it's kind of like boys are not taught necessarily to emote or show emotions, either by verbal expression or shedding tears or crying or even using words. It's like every emotion that they show is filtered through, and it comes out as anger, like aggression. So they're sad, they get aggressive. They're angry, they get aggressive. They're hungry, they get aggressive. They feel ashamed or vulnerable, they get aggressive. Yeah. It's kind of like there's no other way.
Aggression is the only acceptable. Anger and aggression are the only acceptable male emotions, right? Which is the problem with toxic masculinity. That's what it is that they're not allowed to be sad or excited or happy or, if they're too happy, it's almost like, oh, stop,
Like, what are you doing? Yeah.
Being sad or disappointment. And I really try to, I swear I'm so, I think aware of that I'll never get a chance to see that boy as an adult, that I'm like jumping on it and I'm like, it's okay to have all the feelings. And I really talk to the parents a lot about letting their sons be sad and be disappointed and have those feelings that, and not to tell them not to cry, don't cry,
suck it up,
man up, like only girls cry or whatever they're being told. I really, really try to hit on not doing all of that stuff. When I do have male clients, emphasize it because, man, I know I'm probably never going to get the chance to later on when they're adults see them again, so I have to kind of jump on it while I have them in there with mom or whatever.
But you have them as a captive audience at that point.
Yeah. So I really try to emphasize that with my male clients. The teenagers I've had, 15, 16, some of them were in trouble, and that's why they were forced to come, because they got in trouble. They're on probation or something. But a few were brought in by their parents because something traumatic happened. They had a traumatic event, and it has been, they're really insightful. My male clients also have just as much insight and ability to be self-aware as my female clients. And it's really empowering for them, too, when they realize, wow, I have these really deep thoughts that I've never talked about or said out loud, or nobody has validated or acknowledged for me, or I've been afraid to talk about all this. And it's really powerful for them as well, and they feel like finally someone's telling me that these feelings are all normal, and they're okay to have,
Yeah, I remember having an adolescent client, I think, who was 17 when he entered therapy and left as an adult. But he did come religiously to therapy, and we talked a lot about how he was just so different from all his friends. Like, he's like, I can't talk to anybody. And I'm like, why? Don't you have friends? And so I'm like, this doesn't make sense. He's not isolated. He has friends. Why isn't he communicating his feelings? And he finally explained that a lot of people are interested in hearing about feelings, or they might not understand, or they might not validate him. And so he felt alone in that. So it was really interesting to hear him, how you said that your clients can be insightful. Like, this guy spoke like in poetic terms. Like, it was crazy. He has an excellent insight and has always, he was a writer also, so he always would impress me with the stuff that he'd come up with, like, to express his emotions and things like that. And I'm like, wow, like, all this was just stuck in there because, one, he didn't feel heard. Two, he felt like his friends ridiculed him for his feelings. And three, like, who did he have around him to validate him? I feel like I've seen more adolescent boys than men over 18, like, in my practice. Like, part of it is probably because they're being brought by their parent, like a soft mandate or a hard mandate, like you said, like probation or juvenile probation department.
Yeah, I think it's more common to see them as, like, under 18, where they're mandated by their parents, something happens, or parents are concerned. Because I did have my fair share of younger clients who were male. And yeah, boys and girls, everybody has feelings, It's just how we're socialized to use them and recognize them. And if you do, what does that imply, for them? Does it have negative implications or not?
And as we're talking about this, I'm wondering, would it be productive to kind of, if women are coming in and they're not bringing in their boys or partners or whatever, they're not bringing in their children or their partners, husbands, if we could kind of, through them, empower them to reach out to their significant others, to the men in their life, and encourage them to express feelings a little bit more, or that that all that stuff is okay. Because while I do jump on it when moms bring their sons, right, I'm wondering, though, if we should be trying to get through them through all avenues, since they're not coming in, to try and get through men through all different avenues, whether it's their wives, their significant other, or their, maybe through their children too. Has your dad ever said, that he feels sad sometimes? Or, no, he's never said it. And, tell him it's okay to feel that way sometimes. Or I don't know, but I feel like we've got this big wall between us and the male population, basically. And it would be great if we could reach out to them more. Now, I do know that at university counseling centers, there are more. There I saw more males than I ever have where we work right now. So I think that college-age men right now are maybe a little bit more open to talking to people. I did see quite a lot of young men there at a transitional age. So maybe, and I always also, when I have teenagers, I let them know that if they're going to university, you're paying for that counseling center with your tuition, and I let them know they have access to it if they are going to college, So I try to find different ways of letting them know that, mental health is ongoing. It's not once and never again. So I try to let them know they can either return or they have other avenues open to them as well.
Yeah, I agree about the age group. Like I said, I think I see more adolescent boys, and then also like that age of 17, 18, they come, like I've had a couple of men, maybe like 2, 3 right now on my caseload that are that age. I still consider them kids because they're still so little, right? But like technically they're adults, they're 18. So they came and like sought services for themselves. The other thing I noticed about therapy, or just this world of like social work and therapy or counseling, is that there are hardly any men. At least here in El Paso, right? At the agency we work for, it's all women. Our only male staff member just left. And so just all women. So I wonder if that has anything to do with stigma. I'm sure it does, like emotions and expressing emotions, being able to identify emotions.
There have been times when I definitely have felt that a client of mine would have done better maybe with a male, just because I felt that the situation at home is sometimes that it's a single mom, and single moms work so hard, and that's really challenging, but sometimes men need other men to connect to. And I think that we do need more men in mental health, because sometimes there's just certain things that they don't feel comfortable discussing with women. Now, that's all part of building that trust in the sessions, and you can get there, but I think some of them really would benefit from that if they're lacking that connection to a father figure, if they're lacking that connection to someone of a similar age, then I think they do benefit from a male counselor, male therapist. But, you know, we don't have that many, I guess, in the area, they're all not at our agency.
Yeah, at least at our agency, they're all women. What about over there, Monica? Are there a lot of women or men?
I feel like women are the predominant majority of therapists or social workers, mental health providers. I'm part of a larger group here that is, it's like a bilingual mental health clinician, almost like a coalition. And out of all of us that are in that, I think there's like 2 males, and there's maybe a total participants of like maybe 20 people, max 20. And so there's 2 men who are bilingual mental health clinicians. So sometimes when we do get those clients who have their husbands or have a male counterpart or a male family member or somebody who's male seeking help, we do reach out to like those 3 people and they're like, hey, are you available? Do you know anybody? You know, anything. We understand that sometimes they need that male counterpart to kind of, you know, talk to.
Y luego olvídate, like a bilingual male therapist, like that's already 2 strengths kind of going against us here. It's like we just need males in general, but then you need a Spanish speaking one for the Latino community or Spanish speakers, right? It's like, ooh, forget it. That's something that, because I did a recording a little bit earlier with one of my friends over the phone, and we were talking about mental health stigma amongst mental health providers. So, for example, a therapist who has depression or a psychiatrist who has a dissociative disorder or something like that, right? It's like they have their own mental health or mental illness. I just wonder how that's viewed by people, right? Like if they were to come out in public and say, I have depression or I have a dissociative disorder, or I wonder if people, 1, would question their competence, and 2, question their fitness to do the job, right? Like,
yeah. Well,
exactly.
It's a challenge, right? Because it's I guess you wouldn't want to, I don't know. I guess because you wouldn't disclose to your clients things, right? Because then it becomes about you. You know, you mean in general, just saying that therapist. Well, I have said, you know, and I have said openly to people around me that in order to be a therapist and to, you know, provide the service, that is a very difficult skill set, I do believe. I think it's important for therapists to know what it's like to sit, you know, not just in the chair, in the therapist chair, but also maybe sit on the couch and understand how difficult it is to be vulnerable, to open up to someone that you don't know, and to understand how the process works and how it is a process. It's not, it's no magic wand or magic pill or anything like that. It's not anything. So I think that it is important to have some sort of experience with mental health yourself, you know, and I think, you know, Monica was talking about some anxiety growing up, and I think that I've, you know, I guess not been formally diagnosed, but if I were to formally diagnose myself, I would I'm sure I have anxiety. I know it runs in my family. I know there's a lot of people who in my family who probably would be diagnosed with that if they went and sought mental health services. And I also think some depression runs in my family as well. But I think it's fairly common though, but people don't know because they never seek treatment and they're just functioning. They're just walking around functioning, and they don't know that they don't have to function that way all the time.
Yeah, and see, like, even hearing you say, like, I'm pretty sure I have anxiety, and then hearing Monica say, like, I had anxiety when I was younger, and then me saying, like, I had anxiety when I was younger, and I've had depression, and I've had to take medication for it, and all that stuff. Like, to just hear you guys, or you two ladies say that, for me was like, oh, okay, like, so I'm not alone. Like, this is something that other mental health practitioners experience. So I wonder if people out there that are listening who are in the mental health field will get some sense of solidarity or a sense of kind of peace, understanding that, you know, it's common. It's not, I don't know if it's common, but it, at least amongst us 3, we worked at the same agency. That's 3 out of like 9 therapists that had a diagnosis,
Right.
So it's like the probability is pretty high, I think, especially with the work we do. Like,
right. And I have been to therapy. I mean, I didn't ever ask straight up, hey, what's my diagnosis? But I have been to therapy myself. And I lucked out that very first time I ever went, I had a really good therapist. And, it was a process that I really benefited from, and just feeling just at ease as a human being in my own skin. But she was actually the one who, she at some point, she was kind of like, you don't really need to come anymore.
yeah.
And I said, yeah, I know, but I really don't. I dislike my job, the job that I had at the time. And she was actually the person who looked at me and said, I think you would actually be really good at this, referring to therapy. And she is the first person that really made me think about what I wanted to do with my life. Well, what else? Because I did have a job and a career, but I wasn't happy in it. So she really opened my eyes to, I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up going back to school for it. It was a kind of a long road, but without her and her insight and her skill and abilities, I never would have realized that.
It's supposed to be common in my head for therapists to go to therapy themselves, because where do you dump all that you absorb all day, right? Like from your clients. So I think it's good practice to be a therapist in therapy.
So, but then the other issue for therapists in therapy becomes that everyone in the community, and then that becomes an issue as far as our own mental health, right? Because I agree with you, but it's just difficult because it's a small community. I mean, as large as the city is, the mental health community is small.
Right.
And so we kind of all know each other, and that makes it challenging. I think that, I guess thank goodness for technology and being able to access now therapy in different ways, but it's a challenge to stay well mentally doing this job that, it's vicarious trauma and all that, and finding then starting services again, or staying in therapy when the community as well as we do, the mental health community.
Yeah, that's true. Like with my therapist, I do go all the way to the west side for her, right? I live on the far east side of El Paso. So I'm thinking, if I were to go to somewhere on the east side, like they'd probably see me, at the store, or like getting CEUs or something somewhere, or they'd stop by the clinic for whatever reason. Like, I don't know. So I'm like, I need to go somewhere where not a lot of people know me. And me and my therapist have had to discuss, like, what would happen if I were giving a training and she were there? Or what if she's giving a training and I'm there? Or what if we both are attending a training and we're both in the audience? Like, how do we handle that? And so we've had to talk about that. But I think it's important to find somebody you feel comfortable with having that conversation, because it's something I brought up like on day one. I'm like, listen, we are both in the same community. Like, we both have similar jobs, and like, leave me alone when we're public. You know what I mean? Like, don't talk to me. So confidentiality and all of that, I think, becomes way more important as well. Right. Like, don't be telling people that I'm here in therapy, but why not?
Right.
Like, am I ashamed of other therapists knowing that I go to therapy? No, but I'm a client, right?
I don't think you're ashamed, but it wouldn't be different from the doctor, like, giving out all your blood test results, right, to everyone. So you don't want that.
Over the intercom. Oh my God.
And I think it comes down to also, like, vulnerability. Like, I know there's been situations where I haven't felt comfortable disclosing it to other therapists, with fears of, or with just seeing how they've talked about other people and stuff like that, where I have had those unfortunate instances of hearing some bad mouthing from other people, and me thinking internally, well, I'm not going to share anything about me because this isn't a safe space, And I have gone to therapy. I know my program, my master's program, encouraged it a lot, just to kind of help us, like, get in those shoes, and knowing how vulnerable that really is. And even as a therapist now, when we've been through these different types of trainings, and we practice these things as clients, you experience what your client, how vulnerable your client is. and how it feels to be on that side. And so I share this with my clients openly and honestly about, the types of therapy, how we've engaged and what I've tried and what I've done and how it's felt for me, just to add like that human perspective of it and to help them see like, okay, she gets it. And it usually helps them open up, and it helps that transparency in that session, or in those difficult sessions of like knowing like, okay, she gets it. She knows how weird this feels, or she knows that this isn't easy. So I think it's really important, because vulnerability is such, that's like, I feel like that's like the yolk, the egg yolk. Like we have all these defense mechanisms and that we try to, protect ourselves, rightfully so, from certain things and certain people and certain judgments, which goes into the whole idea of stigma, because inside we can be so vulnerable. And we have to be careful with where we express that vulnerability sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Stigma and vulnerability and shame all tied together. And you're right. It's nice that in grad school, certain programs push for their students to go to therapy, even if they feel like they don't need it at that time, just so that you can experience being on the other side. And also when we get trained, like in EMDR, we have the second half of this training coming up next week, and they're making us practice on ourselves on real issues, like on each other, So I think it makes us as clinicians more effective with our clients if we can put ourselves in their shoes and sit in that chair on the other side. Also, one last point I think I wanted to make was that I'm not saying that if you have a mental illness, you should not practice. I think what I'm saying is if you have a mental illness and you are a mental health provider, you have a responsibility, an ethical responsibility to go to therapy, get treatment, get medication, do what you need to do to be healthy for the sake of your clients, right? Because if you're over here and you're depressed and you're anxious and you have PTSD symptoms, and you are not functioning well, but at the same time, you're treating people with the same diagnoses or ones that are a little bit more harmful or extreme or more serious, then what good is it going to do those clients if you're not mentally healthy? So I don't think there's anything wrong with clinicians having a diagnosis. I just think that there's something wrong if they're not getting it treated. And like they're in denial about it. Like, no, I'm a therapist. I don't have to do that. Or I know how to do this. I don't have to.
Well, and that's a core concept of therapy is like self-awareness, right? And you have to be self-aware of, I do, I need help, or it's been a while since I have gone to treatment myself. And, I have all this stuff in my head and, maybe I need to go back, or I need to resume regular sessions or whatnot.
That last point that Elisa made about self-awareness is so critical to mental health practitioners everywhere, because we have a responsibility to our clients to ensure that we are healthy mentally and physically, but also that we are aware of everything that we say and do in front of them, because it can have a lasting impact, and even worse, can probably contribute to ongoing stigma. So we never want to perpetuate that cycle for clients. Thank you for listening to part 2 of 4 on mental health awareness and mental health stigma. Until next time, this is Cristal Martinez Acosta on Through the Eyes of a Therapist.